What's going on, guys? I'm Devin Hutcherson with Service-Based Solutions, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined today here with Mr. Robert Cockrell with D&D Insulation out in Texas. And today we're going to be covering quoting insulation jobs and how to appropriately figure out your costs with running your business. Thank you for being here with me.
Not a problem.
So yeah, Robert, if you want to get into it, I saw this comment that you had made in Spray Foam Worldwide when it comes to how to appropriately figure out your expenses. And obviously on this screen here, you've already got this pulled up. If you want to start to dive into where this came from, how you figured out, appropriately pricing, I feel like it's one of the biggest pain points that people in this industry deal with.
It is something that is very lacking on knowledge for most everybody. I learned this 15 years ago when I went through my first school dealing with spray foam. That was back when Demilec was still around. And this is what they taught us in order to figure up how to charge on a job site. This is the formula that they taught us in order to, if you went through this on every single job, it would give you what your price is.
And you said that you've been figuring this out for over the last 15 years. How much of a difference would you say implementing this has made for you in your business?
It gives us our base pricing to let us know, because we use this and then we turn around and we break it back down the opposite way to figure out what our board footage cost is, to where we know that we are still competitive with everybody else. Because I actually found out through doing this that my intimesic coatings was the wrong price. I was actually losing money because I had never updated it and was still going off the same old price from 5 years ago. When you get a chemical in, whether it's open cell, whether it's closed cell, whether it's roofing foam, a pour in place foam, and stuff like that, this general formula helps you know what your board footage cost is on that job. And then, with extra calculations and stuff, you can figure out your labor cost, your overhead cost, to make sure that you're, you know, making a profit instead of losing profit. There's a lot of companies out there now that are doing jobs for sprayer pay, as the saying goes. They may go do a job that, requires a full set of chemical, and say they paid $2,500 for that chemical, but they only charged the customer $3,000. Okay, so
Right.
they made a day's wages off of that job. What happens when they break down? They don't have the money to fix their equipment. They don't have the money to pay their employees. So, and that's what this formula is intended to help with.
What are some of the things that you're looking at or factoring in to determine the difficulty of a potential job that you're going to give an estimate for?
Okay, so a job that my crews are currently on right now. It's a 100 by 100 metal building that
Okay.
with 30-foot sidewalls. So if that building was plain, bare, empty, and we were coming in, no obstructions in the way, you could theoretically get by with charging them a 1.75 base charge. But on the same token, they've already got a bunch of equipment that is in there that we're having to work around. And some of the stuff is 25 feet tall, and they're very large tanks. And with that, that increases that difficulty, because now we've got to get specialized boom lifts. We've got to get an extra height scissor lift because it's 30 feet tall versus, the typical 16-foot tall or, 12-foot tall building. So, we have to go in and we have to rent equipment and stuff like that. There's a lot of safety that's involved in that, and a lot of extra prep work, because some of them tanks are stainless steel tanks. They can't get overspray on. And also, on the same terms, if you take a regular house and you quote it 2 inches of closed cell spray foam or whatnot, and that's mainly what I'll refer to because a lot of people understand, but spraying inside a house, the walls and the roof deck, is a lot easier than spraying a crawl space that's 18 inches tall. In a house, you can spray, anywhere between 1 and 3 sets in a day, where in a crawl space, where if you're very limited in your movements, you might only get a half a set of spray foam in per day because of all the crawling around. You're only able to spray, 3 to 4 feet at a time in a single cavity. And that's how you determine your difficulty factor. We did a job, this was many years ago, for another company that I worked for. When the job was all said and done, we sprayed 2 sets of closed cell foam on this job. It took us 8 weeks to spray 2 sets. The amount of prep work that was involved in it, on top of the fact that we were only allowed to work from Friday at 6 until Sunday at 6. That's the only time we were allowed to spray. 2 sets of foam. That job cost that customer around $115,000. But we had vacuuming that was involved with it. We had a specialized paint that had to be sprayed over it afterwards because of the corrosive nature of that particular type of job. Every time we went out there, we had a minimum of 8 people out there. And I'm crawling around in the rafters, wearing a safety harness, crawling around like a monkey, trying to spray. I would spray, a quarter set of foam per day. If these guys were to, do $1,000 over what their chemical cost is, there was no way that you could have made money off of that job. This setup it's designed to make everybody comparable. Not everybody's price is going to be the same, because an owner operator doesn't have the same overhead cost as someone like me, where I have 9 employees, I've got 5 vehicles, I have a building that I have to pay for, insurances. So there's a lot of different factors into that difficulty that you have to factor in.
Right. So you're saying, when looking at something like this, treat it more as like a guide rather than a commandment within the industry.
Exactly.
For people who say they are the owner operator then, and they have this, and then they are looking to scale, how would you be adjusting your pricing knowing that you're looking to grow the company, but you're not there? You haven't really brought on your employees yet. Like, how are some of the ways that you would start to adjust your pricing or adjust figuring out what your expenses are when it comes to this guide, so that you can start to grow into the company that you want to become?
Obviously you would increase the difficulty factor by, and you don't have to do it by much. Obviously, the bigger the job, the bigger the growth is going to be and everything. But it's really surprising to see, if you take, and we'll just do a basis of 1,000 square foot at a difficulty of 1.75. At that, it's $1,750, we'll say. And then if your overhead increases by $150 a month, let's just say, you change that from a difficulty of 1.75 to say 1.9. Okay, so now that's $1,900 for that particular setup. Is it a lot? No. But if you're doing multiple $1,900 jobs, it's an increase of 150 for that one particular job. Well, say you did 10 jobs that month. Well, that's an extra, let's say $150, 10 jobs, that's an extra $1,500 that you made that month. That more than covers that $150 increase in overhead that you had. When you get your basic board footage cost, you can get a general idea of how much each job should cost. We can start going over this, and I can start pointing out the different things and breaking it down. All right, so let's start off with, we're looking at the square footage, which is right up here. That is, you have to break down your square footage for your different thicknesses. Let's go into the thought process of open cell now. So on typical open cell walls, you're going to spray 2x4 kV 3 to 3.5 inches. On your roof line, you're going to spray 5.5 to 6 inches. So there's two different calculations in that that you have to figure up. You know, if you've got 1,000 square foot of wall space at 3 inches thick, it's going to be your square footage, which is 1,000 times three, which gives you 3,000 board feet. But if you got, and then inversely, if you've got 1,000 square feet of roof line at 6 inches thick, now that's double the board footage. So you've got 6,000 board foot. So now that total job has come up to 6,000 plus 3,000. That's 9,000 board feet on that particular job. So you have to add them separately or figure them up separately and then add them together to be able to figure out all of this. Next thing you're looking at is your board footage, which would be that 9,000, you know, and you divide it by your yield. And that in itself, I've dealt with others that have estimated jobs and stuff like that because I used to do travel phone. I was a gun for hire and everything and been all over the country doing that. I did a particular job up north where that particular customer estimated maximum yield on his phone. That's what he based his calculations off. Never ever base off of maximum yield. You base off the lowest end yield that you can get by with. Closed sale manufacturers typically say they can get 4,000 to 5,000 board feet. Don't use that because there's so many intangibles that you're going to miss on a job site that you're never going to get that actual maximum yield. Bid it at 3,500. Bid your open sale at 14,000 instead of the 16 to 18 that they're calling for. It gives you cushion. I've seen guys that get on Spray Foam Worldwide or Spray Foam Secrets or, you know, this group or that group. Hey, I'm a quarter set short. Does anybody have any that I can get from? Well, that's because they're calculating maximum yield and not leaving themselves any wiggle room.
When you're talking about the yield and going off of like what manufacturers are saying is the maximum versus like what's realistic, and you're talking about some of those intangibles or variables that are going to impact that yield, what are some of those variables that you're looking for to help with thinking about it? I mean, obviously, like weather and conditions of the project are going to play into it, but is there any other things that you are thinking about as you're looking to create that cushion for yourself?
Substrate. You're not going to get the same yield. Let's look at wintertime. You're not going to get the same yield spraying a metal building in the winter that's the exact same square footage as you would a house that has OSB siding. You're not, simply because the substrate in itself, the metal will not hold heat. The OSB will. You can heat up a house pretty good and it'll actually retain a little bit of heat. What I'm going to go ahead and do is, yes, I've got all this up here, but I'm going to go ahead and move down here and start using these numbers because they're already there and they're easier to explain. Bring it to right here to figure out your price per board foot. You know, estimate cost divided by board foot equals price per board foot. That's up here. Board foot divided by yield equals chemical in need and stuff like that. And then cost of chemical difficulties. I figured this probably when I wrote this, I was thinking of just a typical metal building, 5,484 square foot on the building at 2 inches thick. You know, that comes up to 10,968 board feet. Looking at that, this is obviously closed cell. You know, I've got it annotated right here. Now you take that and then you divide it by yield. So 10,968 board foot divided by, this is going to be a very good yield because you're spraying 2 inches thick. You know, you can bump up your yield factor a little bit, you know, 4,500 board foot yield per set of chemical. You've also got to take that with a grain of salt because not all manufacturers ship the same amount of chemical in a barrel. For example, there's one manufacturer that if you buy directly from them, when they ship chemical to you, it's 1,051 pound sets. But if you buy it through a distributor, a secondhand distributor, now it's a 975 pound set. So you're losing 75 pounds worth of material. That is going to impact your yield per set of chemical. if you get a 500-pound set of ISO versus a 551-pound set of ISO, that's roughly 5 gallons or so difference in weight. And that changes a lot of the calculations. That's some of the things that you have to learn over time because you don't always know that. And that's another reason why whenever you're buying chemical, you should be measuring your chemical. Because I've been on jobs before where we're sitting there spraying along and I had forgotten to measure. And we're sitting there spraying, and all of a sudden I'm out of chemical. I'm like, what's going on? And I start looking and stuff like that. I wasn't off ratio or anything like that. It's just the manufacturer had a hiccup when they were filling these barrels up. And instead of putting 49, 50 gallons of resin in the barrel, I accidentally got 42 gallons or 35 gallons. I've had that happen. And the only way to know that is by measuring the chemical. And it's like, oh, wait a second. This barrel was short because I'm extra on this barrel. Proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. You know, the 5 P's. A lot of us have grown up hearing that before. If you prep right, prepare right, then you alleviate a lot of the unknown headaches that you're going to have.
Obviously, what you've put together here and are sharing with everyone, like this is a resource that's going to help industry wide for people who have been in here for a long time. Maybe they haven't dialed it in as well as they could, or for that next generation of people.
And a lot of that issue is these manufacturers and these rig builders in spray foam will sell to anybody. They'll pick a Joe Blow off the side of the road. So hey, you want to spray foam? And give them 3 days training. They have no clue what they're doing after 3 days. Not one. Let me rephrase it. They know enough just to be dangerous. When I first learned how to spray foam, I had 1 day of training. And I sprayed for a good 6 months before I ever went to my first real school. And that was Demolab. And I learned so much. That's where I learned this particular formula. But I learned so much there because I had time behind the trigger to know and understand and comprehend what they were saying. Someone that had never experienced this, it's like trying to speak Greek to an English speaking person that's never heard Greek a day in their life.
Well, it is chemistry.
And speaking of chemistry, that is one thing that a lot of these people do not really understand. The manufacturers, yes, they have a chemist that designs the spray foam, but all they're doing is they're blending the spray foam. The actual chemist and the whole process is really the spray foamer because they are putting out the end product. They are mixing the two materials together. And that's why it is so critical for them to understand how to do it. And that's why I love Bill Bilbin on the fact that he started Spray Foam Worldwide because it has made this industry jump leaps and bounds beyond most people's imaginations. But going through a lot of these classes and stuff like that, SPFA has some of the best classes and knowledge that you could even imagine. They take you from all the way to the very basics with the assistant, all the way up to a master installer, and they test you on all of that stuff. They have a book and it teaches you so much about the chemistry, the history, the proper applications and stuff like that. But so let's get back to this. Okay, so we're looking at 10,968 board feet for the total job, and you divide that by 4,500 for your theoretical yield. Like I say, a lot of manufacturers will claim, 5,000 to 6,000 board feet or whatnot. But we're just going to use this because it's on the lower side. You always want to go lower side so it gives you more chemical for that job than what you actually need. that's calling for 2.44 sets of chemical. And if you take that 2.44 times, theoretically, it's 50 gallons. In reality, it's actually 49 gallons per set of chemical. But you multiply the 2.44 times 50, that gives you 122 gallons of chemical. You take that 100 or that 2.44 and you multiply it by how much you're paying in your chemical. Now, this is actually one of the critical parts right here. This number right here, the $2,327.37.5, that includes your taxes that you pay on that chemical. People will sit there and say, "Oh, well, I'm paying 2,100 for chemical." No, you're not. Unless you're tax free, you're not paying 2,100. You're paying 23.27 per set of chemical. You need to factor that in, because if not, you're losing on each set of chemical $150 easy, anywhere between 150, 300, depending. Figuring it up, 2.44 times 23.27, that equals 5,678.80, because you're going to round up on chemical. That's just the cost of chemical for that job. So now looking at it, or 5,678.80 times 2. So, just using basic numbers here, which is an open building, you would charge the customer 11,357.60. And if that same building has already been framed in, well, now you're going to be doing a lot of starting and stopping. You're going to actually be wasting some chemical, because when you start and stop, you're going to have highs and lows. So,
Right.
You bump up that factor, to 2.2. Now that comes up to 12,493.35. So now that's $1,000 difference right there, just by increasing that factor by 2, or 0.2, should I say. This building
Right.
right here, 2.44 sets, a really good person, and my best day ever, I sprayed right at 2.5 sets. So you could do that job in one day. So now you've had a gross profit of $11,000. Well, if they've got the framing in, well, now it's not going to take you one day. It's going to take you 2 days, whether you like it or not. So that's 12,000 over 2 days. So now your gross daily profit has become $6,000. That's a big gross profit difference.
Yeah, and like we were talking about before, with difficulty factoring in some of those other elements like the opportunity cost, because now that this is a 2-day project, you've now lost the opportunity to work on another job site.
Exactly. Not only that, but yeah, it calls for 2.44 sets. You can't go to the manufacturer and say, "Okay, well, I need 2.44 sets of chemical."
No.
No, you're going to have to buy 3 sets of chemical. So if you buy 3 sets of chemical, well, now that's going to cost you $7,000 right there. You take that 11,000 right there, and you automatically subtract $7,000 from that, and that gives you your basic net profit. And then you have to take in consideration your payroll and all that stuff. That's going to come out of your net profit of $4,000. Your overhead costs are different for everybody. Is your vehicle paid off? Are you still paying on it? Is your rig paid off? And you don't want to be on a basic job. You don't want to be so astronomically high that people aren't going to sit there and go with you. But on the same token, you don't want to be so astronomically low that you're losing money on that job and barely making it, because that's how a business fails, is they don't properly price everything. I was sitting there telling you earlier about my DC 315, that my antimessic coating prices, I was 75 cents too low per board foot.
That adds
And
that adds up.
it does by quite a bit,
Yeah.
because that chemical has went up in price 250, and now it's $350 per 5-gallon buckets. And yes, they say that you should be able to get X amount of coverage on that job. I go way low on it. Yeah, they say you're supposed to get 150 square foot per gallon. I don't do that. I do 80 square foot per gallon. And people ask me all the time, well, why do you figure that up? Well, you have wood framing that you're going to be touching. That's extra square footage. If you're in a metal building, you're not just going to paint the foam, you're going to paint the purlins too. Well, that's extra square footage. You've got to figure those intangibles into your costs. Majority of the time, most places around here don't have five, six, seven, 8 rigs. They've got anywhere between 1 and 3 rigs. Like I say, most everybody has between 1 and 3 rigs. They might have anywhere between 1 and 10 employees. So they have to make a certain amount of profit in order to provide for those families. I've got five or six different families that I have to make sure that they get their bills paid. And that's why I use this formula is so that way I'm priced competitively enough that I make a decent profit. And when I make a decent profit, I can pay them gentlemen well. Well, I seen a guy the other day in one of the employment pages saying, well, I'm willing to pay X amount for a sprayer and Y amount for a sprayer and helper. I was making that kind of money 10 years ago.
It's like you were saying that it's like that's where it's so that's why this is so important, because it's so there are all these other factors that are into
Yeah.
it. And so if you're that out of tune with the market, like, trying to figure out like what's the amount of profit that you're trying to get per rig, that in a
Yeah.
lot of ways it does feel more and more difficult for people to
Yeah.
get started and to scale up. But having a resource like this, I know, is something that a
Yeah.
lot of people in this industry would greatly benefit from. So
Yeah. And another thing that would, calculate into the difficulty factor. How far away from your shop is that job? Is it 5 miles down the road like the job that we're currently on right now? Or is it 200 miles away? That's a huge difference because now if it's 200 miles away, now you've got to figure in hotel stays, extra money for food for your employees. That's why you've got to look at a lot of that stuff. And the nice part about it is with this formula, it doesn't matter what part of the country you're in. It doesn't matter what you pay on chemical. It
right.
works.
Yeah, absolutely. But the framework that you've been able to provide here, this it's like a template, again, it's not a commandment, but it's definitely close
It
enough to a North Star to really help some of these guys out, regardless of where they're at.
exactly. Sitting there looking at this right here, you sit there and figure it out. You figure up $11,357.59. Okay, so I'm gonna break out my calculator real quick. 11,357.59. Now you take that and you divide it by the board footage. So 10,968. That equals to $1.04 per board foot is what you're charging. But on the same token, so you've got that. So that's $1.04. Okay, so now you take that 12,493.35 and you divide that by the 10,968. Well, now that's $1.14. That's a 10-cent increase because of the difficulty factor. When you start doing this enough, you can sit there and say, okay, well, you can pick a basic price. Okay, let's just say it's $1.14 for a regular building. But then you come up to a wide open building. Oh, well, I can afford to drop my price just a little bit. And and you figure it up basic price of $1.15. I mean, not $1.15, but $1.07.
That not only this template, like it's not only going to provide you a good idea, but as you get the experience and the reps, and then you'll already be automatically able to kind of calculate in
Yeah.
that cost per foot to get an idea,
Yeah.
just as you're walking it, what it's going to look like for you.
Yeah. So you can set your base price, your base square foot price. You can set that for the easiest, simplest job. And then, increase your price 5 cents here, 10 cents there, depending on the difficulty to cover the differences in the difficulties. And a lot of us, we have base square foot price, whether we say it or we don't. We still have a base price. We just sometimes don't realize it. But that's where the factor comes into play. That's where it changes.
I mean, I
But
think this is tremendous. Yeah, that's I think this is for a lot of people out there who are going to be able to sit down and watch this and take notes and rewatch and revisit it. That thank
if
you
they don't
for.
fall asleep during it.
Hey, if they want it bad enough, they'll stay awake. They can
Yeah.
they can throw a pack in and they can in the lip or something to get the boost they need to sit through it, because this is going to make a world of difference for their business. So thank you, Robert, for taking the time to go over this in such great detail. It was a pleasure to get to talk to you about this, and I really look forward to finding time for us to have conversations in the future, going on talking about different elements of insulation and being able to give back, to other
Yeah.
members of the community in other ways.
Not a problem. And, and anybody can look at my YouTube page, for the different training videos that I've got. They can always reach out to me. If I don't know the answer, I can find the answer. I know
Great.
who would know the answer.
And
So
what's
if
that?
they,
What's that YouTube page? Do you know your handle offhand for anyone who
it's
wants to go and look at it?
Robert.Cockrell. So that's my YouTube.
Okay, great. Any other platforms that you're on, or just
Uh,
Sprayfoam Worldwide to get in touch with you, or if they have questions, it's
yes.
the best way to get in touch.
So, I mean, I've got a TikTok, but I don't ever post on it. Instagram, I don't ever post on that either. Uh, they can either reach out to me on YouTube or through Spray Foam Worldwide on Facebook and stuff like that. I'm constantly answering questions for different people.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Robert, for your time for this.
Yes, sir.